If you've been following the polling this election cycle, you're probably scratching your head. Bizarre does not even begin to cover it. We are talking about polls from respected sources showing diametrically opposite results on the same states, the same demographics, and sometimes just from days apart. So today, on Election Day, this beautiful fall day in DC, let's attempt to make sense of this roller coaster. First, let's talk Iowa. Now, you've probably heard of the Des Moines Register poll, considered by some the gold standard for Iowa. Back in June, it had Trump miles ahead at 18 points. This was when Biden was still in the race. Then in September, when Harris stepped in, that lead shrunk to 4 points. And now it's showing Harris ahead by 3 points. So we're looking at a 21-point swing from June and a 7-point swing since September in a state that was oh so red in 2020 and 2016. For context, Trump's team is saying that this poll is nonsense because the crosstabs weren't revealed. And to be honest, as someone who runs a market research firm, that does seem a little sketchy. Here's an example of what crosstabs look like from a poll. Each question is broken down on the side with responses segmented across different demographics on the top. It makes you wonder, since the subgroups weren't shown, if perhaps the pollster oversampled Democrats. We just don't know. That's just a guess. There's also been another Iowa poll from Emerson that has Trump up by 10 points. So both of these well-known pollsters have totally opposite numbers. One says Harris is up by 3, one says Trump is up by 10. So who's right? Well, we'll find out soon enough, won't we? Let's shift to some battleground states now. Over the weekend, just a couple days ago, the New York Times Siena College's final battleground polls were released. And in every one of those battleground states, the margin of error is reported as plus or minus 3.5 percentage points. But here's the thing, none of the differences were outside that margin of error, meaning that this poll is completely useless because any leads from either side are statistically insignificant. But the worst part about this poll is that the New York Times highlighted potential sampling biases in their polling methodology. They say that white Democrats are more likely to respond to their surveys than white Republicans, which actually could result in a severe underestimation of Trump's support. So they have acknowledged this bias, but they haven't done anything about it. Here's the thing, if this really is a known bias, and it is because they published it, at my company, we would have gone out of our way to make sure that we had a representative sample before we published these results. What's worse is that knowing this poll didn't increase the margin of error. I can't believe that this poll was even published like this, with this essentially a giant asterisk saying that they might be severely underestimating one side's support. If you have to put out a caveat like that, can we really consider it a reliable poll? The answer is pretty clear. It's not reliable unless they statistically weight the responses to account for the bias they've identified, and it doesn't seem like that's something that they did. Meanwhile, over at Atlas Intel, the most accurate pollster from 2020, congrats, they're showing Trump ahead in all 7 of these battleground states. Atlas even has Trump up by 6 whole points in Nevada and Arizona. Confused yet? This is why people's heads are spinning today. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that polling is not really that accurate anymore. I mean, we're still polling by telephone. Let's face it. Who is picking up their phone at 8 p.m. on a Friday night and talking for 30 minutes with a pollster? I would. Would you? Today, fewer people answer their phones, especially to numbers that they don't recognize. I mean, I personally use an app called Hiya to block spam calls. I'm sure people use a lot of different tools for this, but bottom line, it's not a pleasant surprise for most people to get a call asking about your politics. I totally get that data given to the polling companies comes with phone numbers, not emails. So that process probably does need to change. But even with the phone numbers that they have that are connected to your voter registration, why can't a polling company text out a survey link? or text out the questions themselves. As long as they legitimately identify themselves, I don't think most people would have an issue. If you got a text saying, this is such and such polling company conducting a poll of voters in your area, please take this survey, I think we'd see a lot more responses. There would also be a lot less social desirability bias, which is something that happens in telephone polling a lot, where respondents answer the way they think the other person wants to hear. In an online survey, or in a robocall for that matter, we see a lot less of that. So given that response rates are plummeting on these polls, pollsters wind up with samples that aren't really representative. If you want a representative sample, and I know this from conducting hundreds of market research studies outside of politics, you pay people. You incentivize them to talk with you. My company Bixa doesn't do research in any other industry where our participants aren't getting paid because you don't get a good random sample that way. And yet, politics is special? This is yet another reason why there's not a representative sample in any of these polls and why they're not consistent from one to another. Some polling companies have been recruiting panels with demographics that match the US population. That is a better approach, but not all of them are doing that. So we need to A, send out online or text surveys instead of calling, and B, we need to make sure that the right demographics are participating by paying them incentives to do so. And if we know about some sort of bias we're getting, like in the case of last weekend's New York Times Siena poll, a good, reputable, unbiased research company would have performed a technique called statistical weighting, where we weight the data to account for any biases we know about. The fact that this poll didn't do that is unconscionable. Now, we've seen dramatic swings in polling this election cycle, and there's going to be plenty of hand wringing tonight and tomorrow as people try to make sense of the numbers and the projections. So here's what you can do. If you haven't voted yet, vote. Just vote. That's all you can control.